Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Atolagbe, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make this floral silk dress with ruching at the sides, and off shoulder detail, exaggerated sleeves, and also a cuff at the wrist. In this video I'm not going to make use of the pattern drafting technique that I have used in all of my previous videos. In this one I am ditching my patterns and I am going to work with freehand cutting to get to what I need to get to. Yeah, so freehand cutting is basically a watered down version of pattern drafting method. It makes use of less body measurements. It is simpler. It makes use of less tools. All of those French curves and rulers and tracing wheels, they just don't feature here. And mostly people just draft straight onto the fabric. So that's what I'm going to do today. This is the most commonly used method in Nigeria by Nigerian tailors. I, for the most part of my sewing journey, have used that method. That was how my aunt taught me to sew before I recently took pattern drafting classes. I would definitely say that there are people who are really adept at freehand cutting and have been able to manipulate it into many different things and just be very creative with it. But in general, pattern drafting is better because it's versatile and it's just more precise in its results. That said, this is going to be a detailed video, but I'm also going to leave timestamps in the description box so that you can just keep to the part that interests you if you're not keen on watching the entire video, although I do wish that you watch the entire video. I also hope that you find this video valuable, and if you do, please do like it and subscribe to my channel. So for this dress, we're going to need minimum measurements, like I said earlier, just the waist measurement, hip, the bust, the shoulder to waist measurement, and also the long sleeve measurement, which is the length of the arm. In this video, obviously, I'm going to make use of my measurement. So let's start. Starting with my front bodice, I measured the length of my shoulder to waist, which is 16 inches, onto the fabric. But I added an extra inch to make it 17 so that I have half an inch to finish the top of the bodice and half an inch to join it to the skirt at the waist seam. I moved on to the top of my bodice. I'm going to cut off this part anyway. So I measured half of my crossbody measurement at 7 inches. I measured my armhole depth at an 8.5 inches just because this number works for a wide range of sizes, including mine. This is not pattern drafting. In freehand cutting, intuition is used a whole lot, and this is one of those numbers that have arisen from, other people's experiences and also just intuition. My bust measurement, which is a 32, I'm going to divide it by 4, and that's an 8, right? So 8 goes in there. I'm measuring 8. This is my bust, and also I'm adding half an inch of sewing allowance. If you're wondering why I would divide by 4, it is because the number 32, my bust measurement, represents the entire circumference of my bust area, and so we are assuming that half of that belongs to my front and half of that belongs to my back. And since this is the front bodice and I am cutting on fold, I only have to measure 1/2 of the front. At the waist seam, I measured 6 inches, which is also a quarter of my actual waist measurement. I added 1 inch of dart allowance and sewing allowance. You could add more if you want. I connected the waist to the bust using my measuring tape as a ruler because I was trying not to use an actual ruler. Seeing as it's an off-shoulder top, I cut out a part of the bodice I measured 4 inches for this, but I would later cut off an extra 1.5 inches. So feel free to measure 5.5 inches from the get-go if you're making yours and following my tutorial. This will form the area between the shoulder and where the dress starts from when it's worn. Now time to cut out the front bodice. For my back bodice, I placed the front bodice on the fabric for the back bodice, and then I made sure to add a zipper allowance at the center back, a zipper allowance of 1 inch, and then I cut it out and I slashed that open. To mark my darts, I measured 3.5 inches from the center front. I marked 2 points on each side, half an inch from the first point. And then I squared up to a height of 5 inches, knowing that half an inch goes into the waist seam when I stitch it to the skirt. I transferred the dart points to the back bodice by notching the dart legs with my scissors. If I had a notcher, I would have used one, but it works primarily in the same way. And then I ran a pin through the tip of the dart so that I could use my marker to then mark this point through all of the wrong sides of the 2 bodices. This is also the same way that I mark the skirt dart, only that it's a longer dart. I measured 7 inches for the length. At this point, you probably noticed that I'm using this fabric erasable pen to mark my measurements on my fabric. I got this because honestly, in real life, when I'm sewing without recording or filming for YouTube, I use just about anything to mark my fabric, from pencils to crayons to chalk to whatnot. But for YouTube, I thought that it would be imperative to find something that would show on camera and also seem somewhat professional, and so I fell into the trap of this pen. I don't like this one because it makes such a large impression on the clothes. Like, if I would put it down, it would just start making this circle. It's like it's forming a pool on that one spot, and I feel like it can affect precision and stuff. So if you guys have alternatives for me that I could try, perhaps I need to try another brand. This one is by Aja Chaco Ace Pen. So if you have a better brand or just something to mark for me in general, please do suggest them in the comments below. Moving on to my skirt front, I measured my waist on here as well. Remember, that's 6 inches, and then I added an inch of dart allowance and sewing allowance. Just make your sewing allowance substantial to form a casing for your drawstrings. Also try to keep the skirt and bodice waist alike because they need to align when you're putting them together. I folded the skirts diagonally so I could add some drape. Although this is not a true bias, I also chose 28 inches as the length, which is about twice the length I wanted to have when it's ruched. I marked that across and I drew a line with my free hand. Another generic measurement is the length of the waist to the hip, which is usually around 9 inches. On here, I divided my hip measurement by 4 as usual, and then I marked that it was 8 3/4. And then I added half an inch of seam allowance. I traced this all the way down, and then I decided to make an A-line skirt. I thought that would drape better. I cut out my back skirt just like I did with my back bodice, and then I slashed the skirt open at the center back at the zipper allowance. The facings I cut using the originals as patterns, but with the side seam at only 5 inches long. For the ruching, you have to finish the hem of the skirt before completing the side seams. Here's a closer look. As you can see, the hems are already top stitched, and then I followed by then joining the side seams completely. I created casings for the drawstrings by top stitching the seam allowances on the wrong side like this. My drawstrings were about 1.5 inches wide and about 10 inches longer than the skirt. I stitched the sides together and used a hairpin to turn them inside out. I also used the hairpins to insert all 4 drawstrings into their casings. I stitched the bodice and darts together. You have to make sure that your side seams and your darts that they align. I also installed my invisible zipper. So my sleeve length is 25 inches, and I realized that after I had added seam allowance, deducted what would be the length of the cuff, which is 2 inches, and I had added exaggeration allowance. Exaggeration allowance is basically that extra length of fabric that you're going to need to put into the sleeve so that it has room to drape nicely while staying at the length that you want it to be. So I made that 5 inches, and after I had added my exaggeration allowance and removed my cuff length and added seam allowance, I still ended up back at 25.5 inches, which is the actual length of my sleeve. So I am actually about to advise that you just stick to the length of your sleeve for this part. So as I already mentioned, I measured 25.5 inches as the length of my sleeve here, and this already takes into account all allowances and all required deductions. My upper hem requires about 7 inches of room here, but I multiplied that by 2 since I was going to install elastic, right? So instead of measuring 3.5, I'm then measuring 7 inches. I hope this has not been confusing. Now I grabbed my dress and I walked the sleeve like this and just traced out the armhole on the sleeve. I measured 13 inches at the base and I connected it back to the armhole and cut out my sleeve. These are my cuffs. They are 5 inches by 9 inches. I had already added interfacing at this point, and I proceeded to stitch them at the sides. I gathered the wrist of my sleeves using the longest stitch length on my machine. And then to sew the cuffs, you would have stitched the side such that you have half an inch of fabric unstitched. Now stitch the gathered sleeve onto the one side. Then fold the other side inwards and top stitch at the edge of the cuff, making sure that the stitch catches the other half under. I went on to stitch on my facing to the dress. Then I installed the elastic between the sleeve and its facing at the upper arm. You have to make sure that you keep pulling the elastic as you sew, because this is 8 inches long and it's obviously a way smaller than the length of the sleeve. This is so that, of course, it pulls it together. So you have to make sure that you keep pulling as you sew, and also do try to avoid stitching on top of the elastic, as that's going to defeat its purpose. I found these snap button things and I installed them using a button sewing foot and a darning plate. In the end, we look like this. I hope that you found this video valuable. Do let me know what you think in the comments about this freehand cutting method versus pattern drafting method. Also, let me know if you're going to be making this dress or a dress like this. I would like to know in the comment section. If you have liked this video, please do actually click the like button, and also please do subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching today. I will see you in my next video. Bye. Stay gracious.